So we've got a whole bottom end here stripped out. So we're going to pull out, on this one we've got 6 bolts. This one's right in the middle of your cooler lines, either side of your intake. These are your porting. One's along the side. I'm going to pull out these. Sorry, you don't want to look at my back. Yeah, there's 2 sealing washers on that one. I'm going to do it with the screwdriver. There it is. Okay, now there's 2 threaded holes here. You can use slide hammers with 3/8 bolt ends in it, here and here. And you can use that with 2 slide hammers like you do on a Chrysler and hammer it out that way. The way I usually do it is I stick it behind the regulator valve, right by the rooster head here, in between the forward clutch and the back of the pump, and it pops right out. And here, yep, she's burned up a little bit. This is our thrust washer that controls end play. These are our 2 sealing washers. This is where oil flows from the valve body through the pump, through a pump channel, out this to your forward clutch to engage forward. This is your pressure regulator valve, which also runs with your valve body and gets system pressure through the porting at the bottom here. So it's absolutely critical to get this gasket seated properly and straight and get them bolts torqued properly. Now when you cut the bevel off and you're hanging all that weight off of 6 bolts, that's a lot. That's why I insist putting on at least 1 more right here. This was omitted in the pump. As you can see, there was a bolt hole right behind it, which would go right in here. But if you look on the back side, and there's also another video on this where you can drill that out, give you another bolt hole. You could actually just do that on a regular build. See, a lot of times they have this boss here, which is also in another video, and it ain't drilled. This one's drilled here, but it's missing one completely right there. So there's no rhyme or reason to how GM did it. You know, so you never know until you pull the pump out. A lot of them only had 6. Sometimes they'll have all 8. They'll have 7. They'll have, you know, you never know. So this is our input shaft. This goes to our forward clutch. And she's gonna be, oh, she's jammed in there. Yep, there she came. You notice, like right on the end, we got a nice wasp nest right there. So we'll have to make sure that gets cleaned. You know, and then this, some of your fluid supply flows in through the input through different areas of the torque converter right there. So this has to be cleaned. A lot of people miss that. One of the things you can check too, and we'll get into disassembling this, is that you got to make sure that this shaft is tight in this drum. See, a lot of guys will take this out to do your clutch packs. Never do that. I'll tell you later why, but we'll get into this later. Okay, at this point, this is our direct clutch that you're seeing next. This comes out as an assembly as well, just like so. This gives you, locks up, in your driving conditions, the forward clutch that I just pulled out is locked up all the time in first, second, third gear. It drives forward, drives all the forward gears. In reverse, that disengages, and this is your driving clutch. This locks up solid with the forward clutch to give you third gear, 1-to-1. But primarily, like for demo cars and stuff, this is the one that we really spent a lot of time replumbing and packing this properly. So, because this is your main drive in reverse. So it essentially turns this into a 1-speed clutch, and the other is a 1-speed clutch through the planetary. Right here, anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. This is your one-way clutch. This spins in first gear, locks solid. This is along for the ride in first gear. It locks solid that direction, and this comes to a dead stop for second gear. In low 2, there's a band right here. And this band, via that servo I just showed you, locks around this drum to give you extra holding power in low 2. This can break if you slam a lot of gears. That's why, like on a lot of your later model ones, they used a, I believe it's a 34 element dogleg Borg Warner sprag, and that alleviates a lot of them problems. We don't use the sprag at all in my derby builds. We actually do some replumbing there. So right here is a 3-disc intermediate clutch. This is the clutch that's going to engage that sprag on the direct drum. We're just going to get in here with a screwdriver. Pop that clip. Another thing you're going to want to look at is the frets right in here. I call them frets. You can call them lugs. You can call them whatever the hell you want. And you want to make sure these aren't busted out. Make sure everything's in there. And this clutch actually looks beautiful. Yep, it was rebuilt. It says Raybestos on it. Somebody was in here. And that's a lot of you, when you go through this, most of these had been rebuilt at one point. You rarely ever get a virgin transmission when you get, especially Chevy short shafts. You're going to inspect this for cracking. Being that this is one of the 3 clutch packs, this is the one that actually sits open outside of a drum in the case. It looks really good. What you're going to look for is, see if, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but there's machining or lapping marks that go straight across. It's not wore in a circular pattern. I can still see the lapping marks. I don't see, these can crack. You can break these frets out of the case. Steels look really good. You could actually reuse this if you really wanted to. And on this clutch, see what, do we have a, okay, there's actually, the bottom one is a cushion wavy right there. You can kind of see it. Now, it's debatable. Some people take that out and put a regular steel in there. Some people insist that you have to have a wavy steel in there for cushioning so you don't rip the frets out of the case. It's a builder's opinion, depending on how much pressure you're going to run, how violent is it going to be. You can actually, if you want to put a 4-disc clutch in here instead of 3, you can take this locating lug and omit the low 2 band, and they give you an extra aluminum piece you can bolt in through the side of the case to give you more support, so when it hits second gear, it doesn't blow the case out. Usually don't see that with a lot of stuff I do, because that's more of like a pro mod racers type thing where they're running big horsepower and a lot of system pressure and in very violent cars on the track. You don't really see it too much in demo derby, although I've seen some bizarre shit this year. Okay, we're down to our planetary gear set. This is all going to fall out pretty quick. We had, right here is your piston and the center support. You have your sealing rings that fluid flows through from this direction through your center support to get to your direct drum. This piston that sits in the center support. We have a bolt that goes in this direction, which I took out earlier. So make sure you get that out, because otherwise you're going to just basically step on your own hand, basically. And these can be a pain in the ass, honestly. And just like I said, I use one screwdriver behind the clip, one up. This has a stamped steel piston in it, so it makes it real easy. There's a lot of room. They also used aluminum pistons, and they sit tighter to the case because they're a larger piston area, and those can make it a real pain to get that stuff out. So this should essentially fall out like so. We've got, this is how your gear set unit goes in and out. Looks like this is your drive gear for the speedometer. Sometimes these are steel. This one's plastic, so it's interchangeable. You have your rear planetary, your front planetary, your cast center support, and we're just going to go throw this on the bench for now. Now we've got your pre-1971 transmissions. In about 70-71 they discovered that the center support was wallowing out cases because it was going like this and hammering around, and it would start cutting into the cases. So they machined the center support 40 thousandths thinner, and they put in this ring. which essentially just sits right behind the center support. This is an upgrade that came from the factory from 71 on, all the newer ones. But if you have an older one from the 60s, you can retrofit it. It can be a pain, but you take the newer, you can just get a newer center support or find a newer transmission. You can get them aftermarket. You can even find them on eBay if you don't do this every day. And just get this 40 thousandths thick fretting ring and put that in your older transmission and you alleviate the problem. But no, don't get these confused. The thin one goes below the center support. There's a bevel ring that holds it in, and there's a reason it's beveled. It's because between these planetary sets had an end play on the back that you adjust. And the cases were cast differently. They're all over the place. So they made this ring a bevel ring so it would sit tight to the inside of the case so all your fluid passages would line up. Now, they say that you can put this in upside down with machining. I've always just used the bevel ring. And the reason I do that is because that way I know it's driven in tight to where it needs to be in the case. The one that holds in the intermediate is a square cut. This is the one that holds in the intermediate 3-disc clutch. Don't get this one and this one confused. And definitely don't get this little one confused with these two. One of the other upgrades you can do for the intermediate too is you can get one of the snap rings in a Chrysler 727. You order the 100,000th thick snap ring, and it's thicker and wider, and it fits in there to help support them frets for the intermediate. I forgot to tell you that. Now we're going to get down to our little one reverse band. This is our holding band. Holds the front planetary. There you go. Just looks just like that. When you tear this out, you're going to look for the, usually these are lined. A lot of times these are reusable. Okay, what else am I looking for? Looks like my thrust washers fell out. What did I do with my thrust washers? Well, they're here somewhere. What did I do with them? Oh, no, I put them back on the planetary. Well, there's a... Let me grab that quick. See, there's a thrust washer that goes at the back of the case. 3-tang washer. This is actually a selective washer. 9 times out of 10 you don't have to change it unless it's damaged. This sits against it, kind of rides like that. This is the one that fits in the rear planetary. This is your rear. This adjusts. This clearance right here is an adjustable clearance. Like I said, 9 times out of 10 you would adjust it by that. If you put your planetary back in and it still won't turn, a lot of times tear the whole planetary apart because one of these thrust washers in there is crooked. If you tear the same transmission apart and it worked before and you put it together and it don't work, you didn't put something together right. This clearance doesn't change itself. Alright, we're essentially done here. Everything's out. Now, some builders will take it as is and just throw it in the tank and go. I actually like to pull the selector shaft out. It's one of the things I do. So what we're going to do is, see, here I can show you. This is how park works. Maybe there, that's all it is. With this little nub that goes in a spool valve in here. So this is all it is damn it. Okay, there it is. You can see how that functions. There we go. So we're going to zip off the 2 5/16 bolts. Look at this. It was loose. This happens. And when that loosens up, you won't have part. So this probably never had part. And it's real easy that can happen. Probably when the guy that built it before, he took this apart too and forgot to torque them 2 bolts because he was too busy with the valve body. not a major deal if you're in a demo car. Also, the other thing that can screw up part, this is spring loaded too, and sometimes these can rot and hang open, and then you won't have park either. There's a return spring for this. Now you can take this parking pawl lever out. It's a big pain in the ass and it accomplishes nothing, so don't do that. Okay, now we're down to the selector shaft itself. This is actually held in by a finishing nail, and it's supposed to be there. Somebody didn't just cobble it in there. All there is an aluminum tab in here and a finishing nail, and that's all the thing that holds that thing in from going out. And if that pulled out, then, well, you have no gears. A lot of times it'll just lock itself into reverse and that'll be the end of it. Oh, wrench. Oops. Okay, we've got our rooster head off and our nut. It's a slotted nut. I don't know what the purpose of the slots are all these years, but I've always just removed it. Now, so you don't damage the case. As soon as I can find the damn thing. So you don't damage the case. You want to get in here and just file the edges a little bit. And then it comes right out. Because don't hammer on that, because if you bend the end of it, then you're getting a new one. Yeah, I have a few, but a lot of times you end up with a new one anyway, because somebody's mangled the hell out of it. But this is essentially done. I can start modifying it now, which is another video, which I'm not going to get into. We're going to go ahead and finish disassembling our parts now, so we can have a good idea of what all we need to order. See if I can. How's this going? Whoa. Okay. Here we have 4 sealing rings. Sometimes these are Teflon. Let's see if I got one right here. This would be a Teflon sealing ring. When I do like a lot, you want to use Teflon for high-speed aftermarket aluminum drums. They work just fine. When I get into demolition derby, I build for heat, so I go with the metal rings. This is also very common to put in for a stock replacement. It comes in the kit. So this is normally what I use, but if I essentially have a performance application, aluminum drum, a lot of high speed, I'll go with, this is a split ring one, or you can go with the aftermarket 4LE. I'm done with that now. We can go with the aftermarket 4LE Teflon one-piece rings, which you have to mold. It's a lot of jacking around. What we're checking for here now is make sure all the old rings spin. We're going to make sure that this isn't, the drum has not, that it rides against, which just sits like that. That sits in there like this. Your intermediate clutch would go right there. You're making sure that this drum hasn't, in its running around, hasn't cut into here and got off balance. You're also going to look at this time, now you got a little more time, make sure there isn't any grooving inside the drum. Set that aside. And here, just to show you how this works real quickly, this is the intermediate piston. Here's that bolt that we took out. So that bolt screws in here, and then fluid would come in here for second gear, and you can essentially engage the clutch that sits here. So it'd be like this. And then imagine that drum is right around there with the band and everything else. So that's how that works. Now the rest from here down, this is anchored. These are 2 planetary gear sets. I'm not going to need that anymore. So what we're going to do, first things first, we're going to get our separating pliers, and we're going to take this snap ring off. It's just a snap ring and a plate. Sometimes these plates on the older transmissions will have a slight bevel. This one's a stamped steel piston with 3 return springs. It has spots for 6. I like to put in 6 if I have extras. But what I really like to do is, I got enough older ones, is this is the older aluminum intermediate, and it's got holes up to 12. Now, GM did put up to 12 intermediate springs in some of their really old Cadillacs, but it's very rare you find them. Even the pistons will come looking like this, but still only have 3 springs, and that's all the book says you need. In performance, I like to put in 6, but I never put in 12. That done. Now what we're going to do, this would be where the low 1 band it sit, and this is going to grab this planetary and stop it for low 1 and reverse for gear reduction. Low 1 and reverse are the same gear ratio. We're going to pull off this as a unit. This is our, I don't know what the actual name of this tube is off the top of my head, but this is pretty much all that drives reverse in your transmission when you have all that horsepower. It's about a little less than an 1/8 inch thick. That's all it is. When that snaps, you have nothing. And honestly, I've never seen one snap. This is your sun gear. This rides in between the planetaries. This can go either way. When you reassemble it, there's a bevel on one side. The bevel always goes down. Sometimes you can get one of these with straight cut gears. They're rare to find. Now there's a thrust washer right here that goes in between the planetaries to keep them apart. Don't forget this, otherwise it'll tear the hell out of everything. This is the same washer. A lot of times this comes out, it's plastic or melted. This is the same washer as the one that goes at the back of the planetary. So you can just get an extra washer when you order your kit and put it in there. Save you a lot of headaches. That's what this guy did when he rebuilt this. I'm going to flip it over. Now this is your rear planetary and your output shaft. This is another snap ring. Some of these were beveled rings. Some of them were straight cut like this one. A lot of the newer ones are straight cut. And this just meshes to the back of the rear planetary and essentially becomes some of the rear planetary. Now you've got a series of a couple of Torrington bearings in here. What we're looking for is Torrington bearing damage. Make sure these aren't tore up. Make sure the shaft is not galled in there. It's not plugged full of crap. This hole needs to be clear. Now on a 4L80E, this is solid. This has to have oil flowing through it to lubricate them Torrington bearings. So make sure that is not plugged full of crap. That's fairly critical. And here you see the planetary gears. You can kind of see how they, let's see if I can get it in there. Maybe. How the planets orbit around the sun. And maybe you can't see it just from the lighting. So we're going to set that aside. These are all look pretty good. It's nice and clean. It's not rotted. As far as the back here, there's a bushing back here. Make sure this bushing isn't all screwed up. Make sure this isn't bent if you want to. Like I use a lathe to tap these things out. You've seen this on a lathe in another video. Make sure them threads are all clean before you put it all back together. Save yourself a headache. Okay, now we can pull the center support out. There's another Torrington bearing yet. There's 3 Torringtons. This is your center support as you would get it from the factory. Not from the factory, from the parts guy. And there's also another thrust washer in here. This one's plastic. You can get those in composite metal too. Here's the Torrington bearing. Make sure that's not all tore up. Now, right here, let's see if I can get you a better angle here. Now this is our front planetary. Oh, see, this is a oh, what is it? It's a centering spacer to keep the planetaries from clanging together. That's all it's for. I like to put it in, but sometimes I omit it, especially in a derby car, because you're not worried about chatter. You ain't gonna hear it with open header pipes. Now here you can see some bluing around the edge. This is normal wear. That's perfectly fine. You only need to worry about these if there's a lot of grooving on the outside, or you see bluing that's got all the way to the outside. Now that's a problem. And this is the roller sprag. Some of the 64 and 65 actually used a very rare Borg-Warner dogleg sprag. If you find one, it's a nice collector's piece. This is essentially the same sprag that they use in monster trucks, pro mods. This is it. There's no real upgrade for this at this time. And this sprag looks like it's all there. You can get these new too. Sometimes these rollers fall out because the springs are shot. So you would just go get a new sprag and put it in the same drum. So we're going to go to the pump now. Or should I do this later? Well, we've got, essentially, this is about as far as I do a tear down. We'll do this later. We have a pump, a forward, and a direct clutch. Right here, we're going to do a pump all on its own because I think it's critical. Then we do clutch packs together on their own as a step. And then we're going to do, you know, basically clean the case and assemble our planetary gear set and intermediate as a step. And then valve body last, obviously. And basically goes back together the same way I tore it apart. So we're going to basically assemble our short block over here, and then our cylinder heads, our carburetor, which would be that. I mean, think of it as 5 major parts. I always think of this like when I get the back of the case together, like, okay, I just put the short block together. Well, now I got to put my oil pump and pan on. Now I got to do my cylinder heads. Now I got to do my induction. You know, it's essentially the same. You know, just like you break down engine building, it's how I do it. So we're basically going to go planetary, clutches, pump, valve body, and then final assembly. So that's how we're going to go together. I will, there'll be other videos. Thanks for watching. I hope you're not bored. wrenchmanrepair.com. I think that's all I can say. Have a good day.